So we talked yesterday about how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez correctly called the situation of the border and where children are being put in after they're being kidnapped and stripped from their parents as kidnapping, in acts of kidnapping, that they're in concentration camps. And we had to go over yesterday, and Sam did a very good job of, first of all, explaining that, yes, in fact, even if you want to just be a pedant and miss all of the vital moral and political urgency of the moment, where, again, children are dying after being kidnapped and separated from their parents in ICE, and which is federal government custody. So let's just let that sink in, as always, before we get into, this nonsense that people want to fixate on in terms of the pedantry. Children are dying in government custody because they have been kidnapped and separated from their families as a matter of federal policy implemented by the President of the United States, supported by the main cable news network, the entire far-right infrastructure, and the Republican Party. Children are dying. That's what they're doing right now as we speak. Concentration camps could refer to situations where Jewish people were held before they were murdered, which would be another definition. Concentration camps also apply to the internment of the Japanese in this country, which is quite analogous, obviously, in many respects to what's happening today in the United States. So we first make this extraordinary mistake, and it makes sense why Republicans would do it, of course, because they want to justify the fact that they are in the legacy of the greatest mass murderers and bigots in our history, and they are responsible for killing children right now as we speak. But then a whole bunch of centrists and Democrats and rational, quote-unquote, people wanted to get us off in a wild goose chase by debating about definitions versus focusing on the point of her tweet, which is a congresswoman saying that we have a responsibility to end a policy of kidnapping and killing children. Seems slightly important. And I think part of the problem here, and we're going to get to this Chuck Todd clip in a minute, is that, and this should never have been the case, obviously, because they've been covering politics through plenty of important things: skyrocketing inequality, people not having health care, the invasion of Iraq, the Patriot Act, the criminal justice system, police murders, and so on. But even with all that, these people are used to covering politics as essentially a totally trivial affair. And in fact, if you wanted to just cover politics as this sort of like pop entertainment exercise, I have no idea why you wouldn't prefer to be covering sports or the music business. More interesting personalities, more fun stuff to watch. But nonetheless, these people have been talking about poll numbers. They've been talking about TV hits. They've been doing relative comparisons between candidates. They are used to talking about this stuff in a banal and trivial way. And it's shocking when the U.S. government is presiding over concentration camps. So what do you do when you're confronted with that? Well, if you're Chuck Todd, you're going to fuse a misplaced moralism and a deranged pedantry to distract ourselves from the crisis that AOC spoke on.
Welcome back. Tonight, I'm obsessed with what's happening at our southern border. You can call our government's detention of migrants many things, depending on how you see it. It's a stain on our nation, maybe, a necessary evil to others, a deal with untenable situation, perhaps. But do you know what you can't call it? Take a listen.
The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border, and that is exactly what they are. They are concentration camps.
That was obviously New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Instagram. After being criticized, Ocasio-Cortez tried to make a distinction between concentration camps and Nazi death camps.
Tried to make a distinction.
No, there is a distinction. In fact, Chuck, there's so much to get to because, of course, in the first, he's already making the deranged moral equivalency. He's already the person that would have softened the Nazi crimes right out of the gate by saying, you can call it a really horrible thing, or you can call it a necessary evil. But there's one thing you cannot call it, which is actually, now I will read the Merriam-Webster definition of a concentration camp: a place where a large number of people, such as prisoners of war, political prisoners, or refugees, or a member of an ethnic or religious minority, we could, I think, be dealing with 3 or 4 here, are detained or confined under armed guard, used especially in reference to the camps created by the Nazis in World War II for the internment and persecution of the Jews and other prisoners. So that's the definition. And then she went and correctly noted that, yes, there is a difference between that and the camps that turned into murder chambers by the Nazis.
Yeah.
So, Chuck, so far you've done a false equivalency in terms of defending concentration camp policy. And then, even by your own little nerd logic, you're wrong. Read the fucking Merriam-Webster definition.
This is an amazing demonstration of them being more comfortable with euphemisms like necessary evil than just actual literal usage of terminology.
Precisely, to the point where they will distort and try to evade the literal use of the terminology.
That was obviously New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on Instagram. After being criticized, Ocasio-Cortez tried to make a distinction between concentration camps and Nazi death camps, where the industrialized mass slaughter of the Holocaust occurred. Fair enough, but Congresswoman, tens of thousands were also brutalized, tortured, starved, and ultimately died in concentration camps, camps like Dachau. If you want to criticize the shameful treatment of people at our southern border, fine. You'll have plenty of company, but be careful comparing them to Nazi concentration camps.
She didn't compare. She said concentration camps, which would, of course, apply also to the internment of the Japanese. And would, again, going back to our Merriam-Webster definition, be a correct use of the word.
If you think it only applies to Nazis, it's because you have a shallow understanding of history. It's as simple as that.
That's it. I understand. You watch Schindler's List. You want a pat on the back. But never again, in the whole moral upshot, not just in fact of the Holocaust, but other great atrocities like Rwanda or Bosnia or crimes not on the scale of genocide. Now, in fact, if she said they're committing a genocide, yes, that would be inaccurate. She didn't say that. She said neither death camp nor genocide. She said concentration camp, which, you know what, Chucky? Let me do this one more time. A concentration camp, from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a place where a large number of people, such as prisoners of war, political prisoners, but now, wait for it, refugees or members of an ethnic or religious minority are detained or confined under armed guard. There you have it. Read a fucking book. Deal with the moral consequences of what's taking place right now. And if you want to defend it, if you want to say, hey, look, I'm not prepared to deal with the fact that the President of the United States and the Republican Party and Fox News, and by the way, if you wanted to complexify it and you wanted to criticize it, you could say building off of an infrastructure that was expanded and institutionalized under the Obama administration, absolutely, that's a fair critique, is responsible for killing children, putting people in ICE lockers who are seeking refugee status. If you want to reduce that to a false moral equivalency between people who rightly call it the horrific crime that it is and other people who are delusional, paranoid racists who have no understanding of how policy works, go for it. But spare us the pedantry when, in fact, she's using the term correctly. You know, someone should really protect Chuck Todd from himself because he's embarrassing himself here, not just morally, but definitionally and in the wonk terms he wants to excel in. And I've seen this take from plenty of other people, including people with some supposedly liberal bona fides. Concentration camp refers to what I've just read from Merriam-Webster dictionary several times. And if it upsets you that that term can accurately be applied to what's happening in the United States right now, well, good. It should profoundly upset you. Take some action.
These aren't connotations you should be protected from.
Precisely. I don't know if there's more of this nonsense.
Yeah, we'll go.
All right. Because they're not at all comparable in the slightest. But here's where it's upsetting as her comment. Some Democrats have been reluctant to condemn her remarks. They don't want to get criticized on Twitter. Fellow New York Congressman Jerry Nadler tweeted in response, "One of the lessons from the Holocaust is never again. We fail to learn that lesson when we don't call out such inhumanity right in front of us." Jerry Nadler surely knows migrant detainment camps are...
Yes. Thank you, Jerry Nadler. Thank you for the correct upshot of an education on the horrific atrocity of the Holocaust. That is, in fact, what people are talking about. Thank you, Jerry Nadler. Well done.
In response, "One of the lessons from the Holocaust is never again. We fail to learn that lesson when we don't call out such inhumanity right in front of us." Jerry Nadler surely knows migrant detainment camps are not the same as concentration camps. So why didn't he just say that? Why are we so sheepish calling out people we agree with politically these days? Obviously, this isn't a Democratic Party thing. It's an even bigger problem on the Republican side of the aisle when it comes to President Trump and the reluctance there. Are we really so ensconced in our political bubbles, liberal versus conservative, that we cannot talk about right versus wrong anymore?
Wait, that's what we're doing, Chuck.
Some things are bigger than partisanship, or at least they used to be.
You mean
and in
like
the interim, the crux of what's truly
pathetic false equivalency, not looking up the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of something before you do a pedantry-filled, failed moral calumny segment to loop back to your only purpose for functioning in public life, which is drawing false equivalencies and reducing politics to a dull Sunday morning show with no human stakes, which is why you could turn a segment about detention centers or concentration camps where children are dying into a dumb, why can't everybody be willing to call out the extremes on their own side? Too often Republicans look the other way when Donald Trump says something objectively bigoted, but at the same time, Jerry Nadler didn't attack AOC for correctly using the term concentration camp.
I'm so committed to norms and the center that I won't recognize concentration camps or atrocities in my own country in its defense.
Wow, I don't even know. I mean, what is it? What is it? I mean, look, I useful idiot. Chuck Todd is a useful idiot for ICE right now.
or at least they used to be. And in the interim, the crux of what's truly at stake is lost. What is this country going to do about what's happening at the border in this humanitarian crisis? We'll get to that at some point, I guess, after we have this debate. I have no doubt, Alexander.
I don't think Meet the Press is ever going to get to
I don't think you're going to get to it, Chuck. I think you showed your hand here about what you want to get to, because you could have just spent 2 minutes talking about children dying in ICE custody because of a Trump policy that is supported by the Republican Party. But instead, you did a pedantry-filled and actually, in fact, wrong segment whining about a tweet which accurately described the moral crisis that you will never get to because you are not equipped to do it. Disgusting. Disgusting. And embarrassing.
It's amazing to go to the pedantry and also be wrong about the pedantry. Like, I mean,
right.
even in any kind of way. Like there's I don't know.
I'm trying to sit in put myself in the meeting where they were writing this and being like, what is it that we're trying to say here? Ultimately, that we've gone so far that norms are gone and therefore we can't even talk about what's actually going on. No, I don't even get it. I don't even know where they're going.
They have the same problem that Meghan McCain has, which is they're trying to keep 2 feet on different sides of a fault line that's massively going away from each other because they don't actually speak. Like they can't cohere. We can't cohere with people that are just like, yeah, what's going on the border is fine. It's not concentration camps. Like, no, fuck those people.
Look, I'm not trying to get into this, but I mean, look, Joe Rogan, we played a clip of him a year ago saying, if you're somebody who is looking at a mother having her kid stripped out of her arms and you say, yeah, but you didn't follow the rules. I believe the phrase he used, you're not on Team Human, I believe was the phrase he used. And I only bring that up to say like that is not a progressive voice saying that. Like there's no middle ground. There's no negotiation point. If you think it's acceptable to kidnap children and put them in prison conditions, If you think it's acceptable to imprison refugees, if you think it's acceptable to terrorize and threaten people living here right now, we're not on the same team. And there's no middle ground on that. And it's funny because the middle ground that people like Chuck Todd always want, right, of course, is precisely that. It's, well, are we going to call it torture? Okay, the Iraq War was a mistake, but obviously if you say it was a lie and a crime, Bush is a war criminal, that's certainly not. That's not rhetoric for the palm.
Yeah. Let's call it a necessary evil. That way both sides get something out of the term.
Both sides.
It's necessary, but it's evil. Oh.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That's sophistry in action.
Yeah, I was going to say that nothing you might want to pull apart in that language. You're whining and freaking out because AOC used the dictionary definition correctly. You just came up with maybe one of the most, well, I mean, it's a commonly used Orwellian term. I mean, what are you going to say? Like, oh, well, you said civilian casualties of bombing. That's super inflammatory. Maybe we should call it an unnecessary byproduct of a necessarily evil thing. Fucking moron.